this morning. Welcome, everyone, to meeting 83 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. The committee, of course, is meeting today to study the main estimates 2023-24, as well as a briefing with the Minister of Canadian Heritage on his mandate letter. Before we start, let's welcome Genevieve Desjardins, who will be our new clerk, taking over from Mike. We welcome Ms. Lanceman this morning. Thank you. The rest of us are in place. So, as you all know, appearing today, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Minister, for joining us this morning. You've brought with you the Department of Canadian Heritage to help out. Isabelle Mondeau, the Deputy Minister. Good to see you again. Owen Ripley, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Cultural Affairs. The bike riding should be good in Ottawa these days. And Eric Doyon, I might have mispronounced that, but close, Chief Financial Officer. And Eric, thank you for joining us. So let's get started. The opening remarks, if we can, from the Minister for 10 minutes. The floor is yours, Minister.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you about the priorities laid out in my mandate letter and the main estimates for Canadian heritage. Call to order. Do we have the interpretation? We don't have a set of headphones.
Are you okay, Ms.
Do we need to begin from the beginning again?
We'll start at the beginning. We'll just actually let's wait and go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you about the priorities in my mandate letter, as well as the main estimates for Canadian heritage. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, I have with me Ms. Isabelle Mondeau, Deputy Minister, Mr. Thomas Ripley, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, and Éric Doiron, Chief Financial Officer from Canadian Heritage. They will also be in a position to answer your questions if you so wish. I often say, and you've probably heard, how happy I am and how proud I am to be the Minister of Canadian Heritage. I had asked to come back. As you know, many say no, they wouldn't like to occupy the same position they have in the past, but I definitely wanted to do so. It's a department that seems of the highest importance to me for Canadians, for the fabric of Canadian society. It's not an easy job. Let me be honest, it's not the easiest job in Ottawa. We have an ambitious agenda, a very important agenda, but I'm proud to contribute to promoting and defending our culture that represents who we are. This is who we are as Canadians. Our culture, and everyone who works in the cultural industry deserves our attention. They all deserve our support. I'm thinking of our artists, our creators, our museums and museum specialists, everyone working in the arts sector and in culture in general across the country, who, together with you, parliamentarians, members of the department and in the cabinet, work to ensure that all our cultural priorities see the light. Many have seen the light and some are in the pipelines. So this sector exists thanks to our artists and deserves our support. We wish to support and encourage books, music, museums, our theatres, local programs and films, as well as support Aboriginal peoples in their efforts to revitalize their languages, promote their cultures, and tell their stories in their own way, ensuring that all Canadians can recognize themselves in what they watch and listen to, that we protect and support our news industry, our newspaper industry as well, and to ensure that our laws reflect our evolving digital world.
Commitments, many commitments, probably more than ever, definitely more than when the first time that I was Minister of Canadian Heritage. And one of the most important, at least to me, but probably to a lot of you too, is to modernize our broadcasting system, to make sure that it reflects It reflects the reality of how the industry works today, because things have changed in the past quite a lot, actually. And we're doing this to make sure that our industry succeeds. We want our people to succeed and to make sure that our artists, creators, producers have all the opportunities that they deserve. Over a year ago, I introduced our online streaming act, and recently it received royal assent, and I think we should be all proud of that. We may not agree on everything, but I think it's a huge step, and it's been a long process. We all know that. The bill, we examined it, we debated it, we improved it, and even if it was tough, parliamentarians worked hard to make this bill into law. It's the law of the land. It's the first time it has changed in 1991. So I want to acknowledge the collaboration with parliamentarians, witnesses, all of those who participating, including, of course, all of you. La loi sur
And the Online Streaming Act that was a first success in a long series of actions we're going to take to level the playing field for everyone. And by the way, when I say everyone, I mean digital platforms as much as our broadcasters and our journalism outlets. There's another step in this series of actions, and it's what we find in C18, our Online News Act. Because accessing reliable quality news is a pillar of our democracy. The work that our journalists do, that our news outlets do, has value. It's worth something, and platforms must recognize this fact and contribute to journalism in our country. This is a fundamental principle for us, absolutely essential to ensure the good functioning of our democracy. As you know, C18 is being discussed in committee, and I certainly hope that the discussions continue. I think things are going well. Our journalism milieu needs this help, and as soon as we're able to adopt this legislation, we will be able to rest easy that we will have local and independent media, and that's our job collectively, to stand up for journalism, to stand up for them, whichever party we represent. We are here to ensure that the press remains free, reliable, nonpartisan, and each and every one of us needs to see to this because Canadians expect us to protect local journalism. They expect independent, free press, reliable, free and nonpartisan press. This is something we need to see to together. As for the remainder of our mandate, we have gotten a good deal of it accomplished. The assistance we provided to the artistic media during the pandemic, for example, and that was the top of my mandate letter. Top of my agenda since I came back to Heritage, given that that was during the pandemic. And yes, we've been there for the sector throughout the pandemic. But I'm sure you'll agree with me that the sector was there for us too. It was so difficult to be isolated, not being able to see each other. Imagine, had we not had our languages, our stories, our TV shows, books and music, it would have been 1,000 times worse. So it's true, we were there to help the culture industry, but they were there to help us.
Imagine a world without culture, without languages, without stories, or TV shows, or books, or museums, or music. So I'm happy to see that because of the initiatives that we put together to the pandemic, 9 out of 10 recipients told us that our recovery fund has helped them stay in business. 9 out of 10. And that's not all. Over a year ago, and you probably remember this, in May of last year, we held a national summit with cultural leaders from across the country, people coming from everywhere, hundreds of people coming to talk here in Ottawa about the future of the sector. And that was another very important moment. We met and we reflected on the needs of the sector, and since then we've seen our artists return to the stage, we've seen our venues fill up, our museums have welcomed back visitors again, and all of this is absolutely great to see. And you know what? The credit in reality, the credit goes to the cultural community because they're the one who did the job, right? We provided the funds. We had programs here and there, but they're the one who worked hard to get back to pre-pandemic level of activity. And we were there for them, and we're committed to supporting the recovery all the way. So a lot has been done, but you'll definitely agree that a lot remains to be done also. So much work to do. And so that brings me to the next topic that I'm here to talk about today, which is my department and portfolio budgets. Pour l'année qui s'en vient.
For the coming year, Main Estimates allots $1.9 billion to Canadian Heritage. This includes $202.9 million in operating expenses and $1.7 billion in grants and contributions. This represents an adjustment of $244.3 million compared to last year. Why? Because we're returning to priorities that we had set before the pandemic.
Export strategy that supports the competitiveness of our creative industries at the international level, and we just renewed it for 3 years. There's also an increase of $74.2 million in 23-24 to support the efforts of Indigenous communities to reclaim, revitalize, maintain, and strengthen their languages. And in the 22 budget, money was also provided to foster a more inclusive arts training sector and to continue to support the post-pandemic recovery of the arts sector. So it's important because it shows that we were there during the crisis, during the pandemic, and that we're still there today, and that we've been there for all Canadians, that we kept our promise to leave no one behind. Et on va continuer d'être là, on va continuer.
And we'll continue to be there. Once again, thank you for your work, your studies, your reports. I'm here to work with you and see what we can do together to help the people whom we represent. So I'm ready to answer your questions. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Minister. The first round will be a 6-minute round. We'll start first with the Conservatives. Marilyn Gladu. Marilyn?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and your department executives for being here today. I'm going to start talking because of the work that's been done with C11 and the C18. The CRTC is going to have a huge amount of work to do. But I noticed in the estimates that they've not been given any additional money in this budget, and there are words there that suggest additional money could be added. So can you give us an idea of how much it will cost for the CRTC to fully implement the provisions of C11 and C18 when it gets royal assent?
For the question, and I agree with you that C11, C18 are major steps, and the CRTC will be playing an important role. I remember that we put in place an additional amount for, I think, was $1.9 million for the CRTC regarding C18. As for the rest, we have to see exactly where we go in terms of regulations and the amount of work that's going to be done, but the CRTC will be fully funded for that, and they're confident that they can do the job on both bills.
Thank you. So we don't really know yet how much that will cost. Now, I remember, Minister, the last time you were here, we were talking about the policy criteria that would be given to the CRTC to determine, which content would be sort of upvoted and which would be buried. And you said that we would see that policy directive or criteria in due time. Now, Parliament has not seen that, but the CRTC has begun their consultations. So I'm sure that they wouldn't be starting consultations without a direction. Have they been given the policy directive and criteria? And if so, can it be given to us? And if not, why are they consulting without a directive, I guess would be the question.
No, they didn't receive it, Madam Gladu. I'm finalizing, and it's no question, a few weeks, shouldn't be very long. I'm finalizing the draft version of the policy direction. Then, as you know, it will be sent for consultation, very important. Then after the consultation, we draft the final version, which is sent to the CRTC. Then they will adapt the work based on that, and they will go on with drafting the regulations, consulting, and then finalizing the regulations. So in the next steps, there will be a lot of regulation, which is a good thing.
Certainly, they need to have criteria, and I guess my concern is that before they've consulted and before they've received a policy directive and criteria from the government, the CRTC is already considering decisions about whether or not they're going to allow the streaming of certain U.S. news outlets to Canadians. This was a concern of President Biden that perhaps the C-11 would result in something that would violate the U.S. Canadian Free Trade Agreement. And so what would you say to Canadians that are concerned that the CRTC may be already starting to talk about what things they can see and what things they can't see?
Well, the bill is Ms. Gladue, with all due respect, it's not about what Canadians can see or not see. C11 is basically doing two things, asking the streamers that we all love, the Disney, Netflix, and others, to contribute to the creation of Canadian content, and also to make sure that what we produce, which is great music, great films, that is easier to find. But it has nothing to do on us getting involved in the content. And the CRTC already said that they're not interested in the content.
Well, that's right, but they've put on the public record that they're considering not allowing a certain U.S. news organization to stream to Canada. So that is telling people what they can see and what they cannot see. And I know the Senate had brought amendments to say, let's exclude, user content, individual user content from the bill, and the government rejected it. They also brought amendments to say that Cabinet shouldn't be able to direct the CRTC on how they should screen or prioritize content that Canadians can see, and that was also rejected. Can you explain to Canadians why you didn't exclude individual content and why you didn't take away the power for Cabinet to direct the CRTC with what to bury?
Because C11 is already not about content. For example, as a user, none of us will see any difference, like when you're a user. And if you're producing stuff for the internet, it's not about you. It's about the platform, even if what you do is great. And we have some of the best content in the world. But C11 only gives obligations to the platforms, not a single obligation to the content creators. And we made sure of that. But I'll be even more specific in my directive to make sure that it's really understood. But already the bill says it. It's only about the streamers contributing to our culture.
Well, thank you, Minister. Let's talk a little bit then about the Canadian Media Fund. I see in the National Post today that there are diversity and inclusion quotas that are being put into the Canadian Media Fund. Now, we did see from your government with the Canada Summer Jobs Program that people who did not ascribe to the Liberal ideology and sign the attestation were not eligible for funding. So I worry when I see diversity and inclusion identity quotas. Could you reassure Canadians that it's not going to be another attempt to make sure that people that don't ascribe to the government's ideology don't get funding?
We would never do that.
Well, Minister, to be fair, that was done under the Canada Summer Jobs, and there was lawsuits that went. Redeemer University won their lawsuit against the government for being discriminated underneath that program. So people are concerned to make sure that the Canadian Media Fund isn't going to discriminate against media organizations, perhaps that don't line up with the government's ideology.
The CMF is doing an amazing job helping the production of our content for television, for a lot of stuff. And
we're over time, so if you, Minister, we're over time, so if you could just wrap up.
Okay, sorry. So we're talking about the 40 million, which is over 2 years, 2020, and this will support the creation of more French content and make sure that some people that we never have the chance to see will be seen a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. Marilyn, we move to the Liberal Party, Tim Lewis. Tim, you're on virtual there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. Thank you, Minister, for being here, and to the other witnesses for being here. We appreciate your time and your energy and efforts, especially throughout the pandemic. It was the artists, the creators, the producers. They're the ones who are sharing our stories, and it's our stories. And during the pandemic, Canadians turned to artists to make sense of what was happening in our lives and to connect. So Minister, if you don't mind, I would like to start by talking about how we're modernizing our broadcast industry. We know that Canadian creators need the support to continue to develop Canadian music and all forms of arts in the world of streaming. our film industry, our music industry, our stories, and Canada needs to continue to support those emerging creators. So with the passing of C11, the Online Streaming Act, foreign-owned broadcaster companies now will have to contribute financially to our cultural system, the same as our domestic broadcasters have been doing for years and years. So C11 is a big win for our Canadian artists and Canadian culture. I was wondering if you can expand on what happens, how that is going to affect and help our art scene now that the bill is passed, then the difference it'll make for our Canadian artists.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Lewis. C11, I would say, is a major step because that bill has not been modernized since 1991. I always joke about saying that I had black hair at the time, but it was true. And also, if you look back at it, we would go to Blockbuster to rent movies, right? Remember, and we didn't have internet in our homes, and we would listen to music on our Walkman. That is the last time the bill had been modernized. The streamers didn't exist at the time, so we were working today until recently with a legislation that was drafted even before the existence of the internet, like in our houses, commonly used. So it was an important step, and there's been a lot of work behind C11. You guys had it here for a long time. It was in the Senate. I think it has the record for the bill that had spent the most time in a committee in the Senate of the history of the country. So I think it's been well studied, and I think it's a beautiful compromise. Is it a perfect bill? No, but I think it's a beautiful compromise that is largely supported by the music industry, the film industry, the television industry. Why? Because it creates a level playing field, and it's going to ask the streamers that, as I always say it, because we do love them. I do. This morning I was working out and I was watching The Mandalorian on Disney. I have Netflix. I have a lot of them, right? And they make a lot of money, which is good. I'm happy that they make money. But if they come here and they make that much money, they also have an obligation to play by the rules and also to support the creation of Canadian content. And the same way that conversations were more difficult a couple of years ago, things have changed. The streamers understand that. And you have not seen a lot of resistance recently for the streamers because they get it. So they're playing ball with the government, not only here but in other countries. So there will be more money for music, there will be more money for television, and there will be more money for movie creation. And I think that's great news for Canadians.
Well, good. Thank you very much for that answer. And yes, you're talking about how now these other companies from other countries have to play by the rules, and that's going to help and protect our culture. But the work is not done. The legislation has passed. It's gone through the House. It's gone through the Senate. It's received royal assent. And now maybe you can explain what those next steps are, because there is that balance between legislation and regulation. So we don't have to continue to kind of chase the technology that's moving so fast. Can you explain what the next steps are with where we're at? Thanks.
Touched it a little bit with Ms. Gladue, Madame Gladue. Next step is finalizing the draft version of the policy direction. That draft version is almost ready. It's going to be out very soon. It's going to go out for consultation. Canadians will be able to give their opinion, and that's a very important step. We'll then finalize prepare the last version based on what we've heard, send it to the CRTC. The CRTC will start drafting their regulations based on the policy direction and other stuff that they've been doing. They'll be consulting, and at the end of the day, they'll be preparing the regulations which will be implemented. And I think that the same way there was a lot of consultation on C11, there will be a lot of consultation on what's coming after C11. And I think it's good, because when we consult people, we get good ideas.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Minister. I believe that's my time.
Actually, Tim, you had another 35 seconds.
I can do that. Well, you know what? I want to thank you. I've been working on this since it was Bill C-10 and working through this and to come up with ideas creatively, all sides of the House, all Senate and the House itself, and having contribution from the ministry has been very helpful. So I look forward to being involved in the next steps. So that'll be there. 3 seconds left. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim. We move to the block. Mr. Shampoo for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin by saying hello to Mr. Doiron. I have a friend whose name is Doiron, family name, and he also often heard his name pronounced as Doyon and Dorion and so on. So Doiron, let's say that correctly. Hello, and hello as well to Ms. Mondu, Mr. Ripley, and to you, Minister. It's a pleasure to have you here with us at last. There's so many things we'd like to discuss. Of course, the bills that we now act that we've been looking at, C11 and as well as C18. I also want to tell you a little bit and chat with you about the new life injected into the industry. I'm sure you've taken into account the recovery fund requests since the pandemic. Many players in the cultural milieu, since the budget came down a couple of weeks ago, have said they're very surprised. They're disoriented. They haven't found what they expected from us in these main estimates. I'd like to hear you on this, what you've heard from the cultural sector. Have you heard a lot of rumbling? Yes, some have expressed their pleasure, some have expressed their displeasure. You're correct. But this isn't even the second year of our mandate, Mr. Shampoo, and we're doing as much as we can, as quickly as possible. Among those who are pleased, we find the museums. They've received a good deal of funding. We renewed the funding for festivals, including small festivals. C11, yes, let me get to the small festivals, small-scale festivals. There were indeed funds allotted to them, but they're the ones who are calling us, telling us that they've got they're 30% underfunded, and that represents a lot of money. These aren't 600 million budget festivals. We're talking about small ones, sometimes less than $100,000 to organize their event, and they are losing support. This is a great loss for them. You say that you have renewed their funding, but not enough of it. Clearly, this is insufficient. Yes, but the difference is this, Mr. Shampoo. The money during the pandemic, there's less than there was given out during the pandemic, and we were always clear on that we would be present, really present during the pandemic. This allowed us to save the festivals, including the large ones, but that now we're going back to the pre-pandemic funding plan. And yes, but why cut now the assistance that was provided during the pandemic? Because the need for recovery, of course, it's a long-term plan recovery. It doesn't happen at the very end of a pandemic overnight. Many who will be unable to go forward with their festivals because they can't pay for their artists and so on. Well, I'm happy you're bringing this up because I'm very sensitive to this issue. This is something that is of concern to me. Of course, all these people count, but this isn't a cut. There was a specific programming during the pandemic, and after the pandemic, they were time limited and they came to an end. As for museums, for example, I am hopeful that the amounts that we have will really ensure that the recovery is complete. There's an important sum from tourism that will very likely come down as well. The large festivals are relatively happy, yes, indeed. It's the smaller ones, as I say, the regional ones who are really struggling. And I told them to call you directly. Very well. Thank you. Then you will hear from them directly. I'm sure you will. I also wanted to bring up, because you've mentioned C11 and C18, two bills that were of highest importance to me, and I think we have pretty much the same view of them. Nevertheless, I was concerned when we were studying them, and specifically C11. I was worried because many people said, and they still are saying, that C11 is a censorship act, and as we both know that's not the case. Perhaps the matter wasn't well explained to them, and perhaps some of our colleagues have, made political hay out of some of the concerns that people have, their worries about losing their freedom of expression. But anyway, now that it's an act, C11, it's legislation, the CRTC will address the matter. Do you intend to be a little more careful, to reassure people? There's still work to be done there, I think. Yes, there's always much to be done to communicate clearly, but I think that there have been many opportunities to respond clearly throughout this debate, not only you and I, but anyone who supports the cultural sector and that act, television, film, and so on. The very many who support C11, of course. I will be even clearer in my directives. The CRTC has said clearly that they take no interest in content, and I've said that, yes, look, content online, how many thousands of videos a day are up? Even if they wanted to go in there and play around with that accessibility, they couldn't. What we want is to ensure that money is provided to support Canadian content. That's all. Now, we can agree that only late in the process did we learn about the official requests made of you by the government of Quebec. For example, that Quebec be systematically consulted when any regulation touches on culture, Francophone culture, and Quebec media. How will you respond to that? It was a very explicit request from the Minister of Culture of Quebec. Yes, I've had good discussions with Mathieu, the Minister of Culture of Quebec, who does very good work. By the way, I'm very happy to work with him. We're doing good work. We agree on that. Yes, good. And yes, Quebec is consulted and will be consulted on all details. The directive, it'll take a couple of weeks to get that out, but you'll see it soon. Thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur Champoux.
To the New Democratic Party, Mr. Julian for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup à nos témoins.
Thank you very much to our witnesses for being here. We truly appreciate your being here today. And our condolences. I think I speak for the entire committee to Mr. Rodriguez. Our sincere condolences on the matter of the recent death of your father. I know that this must be very difficult for you. We appreciate your remaining available to speak to us here in the committee despite this sad event in your family. Our thoughts are with you, with all the members of your family. I wanted to touch on online hate. We have seen more and more incidents of violence provoked by representatives of the far right, if I can put it that way, hate against racialized persons, religious minorities, hate expressed against them, hate expressed towards the 2SL LGBTQI plus community, and so on. We see a number of these things online. So the committee has been working for the last few years on possible legislation to counter such hateful activity online. What can we expect in this regard? What sort of bill are we looking for? Thank you for the question. It's a very important one. I think it gets more important as things move forward. And thank you very much, Mr. Julian, for your kind words regarding my late father. So we've worked a good deal on this issue, and we'll have more to announce shortly. I've been able to work with many of you, including Mr. Biddle, to go forward with consultations across the country, consulting members of religious communities, leaders of religious communities, parents of children who have died by suicide. I still remember in BC discussions with parents whose children had died by suicide because people had been threatening them online. It's just horrible. People who spend most time online are the Canadians who are most vulnerable, meaning our children. And online hate, as you know, Mr. Julian, doesn't stay online. It makes its way into the street. It makes its way into real behavior. We've seen that here. We've seen it in Washington. And online hate, that's real hate. That's real behavior. So we're coming up with something very shortly. But when? In a couple of weeks? Or I can't tell you. Or will it be in the fall? It's not going to be longer than the fall, of course, but I can't give you a specific date yet.
I also note in the estimates a decrease of nearly $12 million for the community support, multiculturalism, anti-racism initiatives in your department. And I mentioned earlier the increases in hate crimes provoked by the extreme right. When we talk about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, 67% increase, sexual orientation, 64% increase, race and ethnicity, 6% increase. This is over the course of the last couple of years. So we see an increase, a decrease in funding at the same time as we see a marked increase in police-reported hate crime. And I want to know how the government manages that contradiction in decreasing funding at a time when anti-racism initiatives are needed more than ever.
On that, I'll turn to Madame Mondou, because I'm the one that created the anti-racism strategy the first time that I was minister, but that is not under me anymore. That is under Mr. Hussein, so I'll turn to her because she knows that file very well.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the question. So you're right that there was a decrease, but there was money in budget 2023 to support these efforts. And as you may know, there is an anti-racism strategy that has been developed, and now there is an anti-hate strategy that the minister is planning to launch probably in the fall, and all of those are coming with additional money. So that drop, if I can say, is temporary because more money came in budget 2023, and we hope that additional money will come also in the context of those two other initiatives.
Thank you for your comments. I would stress that at a time when we're seeing increased hate from the extreme right,
Yes.
There is no doubt that funding is needed more than ever, and these initiatives are needed more than ever. I'm going to turn now to CBC, Radio-Canada. Là, on a eu des...
In the mandate, we saw that more resources would be set aside for CBC, an important institution in Canada.
Do you have a sense now when that funding to reduce CBC, Radio-Canada's reliance on advertising revenue, when those funds would be provided for? And how do you see CBC, Radio-Canada moving forward, a vitally important cultural institution for our country?
You're absolutely right that CBC plays a fundamental role in our country with a very specific mandate to support, minority language communities and to be present in regions to help us understand what's going on in the world. And as you know, in my mandate later, one of the things that I have to do, and that I'm starting now, is the revision of the CBC Radio-Canada mandate. So that will be ongoing. Then we will be analyzing all of that at the same time. But remember that CBC, as other institutions, will also benefit from C-18 eventually. So there's something.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Julian. We'll move to the second round. It's a 5-minute round, starting with Melissa Lantzman for the Conservatives.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to our witnesses, and welcome, Minister. I want to just go back to what my colleague was talking about on C11, and particularly with regards to the CRTC consultation. And it says that they are going to consult on what constitutes a social media service. So I want to ask you, can you define what constitutes a social media service?
You mean what the platforms are?
Yeah.
Platforms are there on the internet, used by people, by Kenyans and people all over the world.
Okay, so if it was so easy for you to define that, why is the CRTC consulting, and why isn't it in the bill?
Oh, why they do that? You have to ask the CRTC. They're independent. What I'm going to do very soon is send a set of directives. They're going to be consulting. I'll be consulting on that, then sending them the final version, and they'll be consulting on their own.
There is no doubt going to be a discussion about whether aspects of certain social media services will be covered by the streaming, covered by the Online Streaming Act. So, look, why not put the definition right in the bill, or why not accept Clause 4 to keep user-generated content out of the legislation? Why not just accept those regulations?
But, Ms. Lassman, it is out of the scope of the bill, and there'll be more precision in my policy directive. But once again, a lot of people said, oh, this will affect user-generated content. But there's no obligation on them. The obligations are only on the platforms. It's about the platforms, not the users or the creators.
So if you're certain about that, why not include it in legislation so it's not in regulation to give people the certainty that it won't be included? Because
for me,
this
it's
is not
clear.
this is not coming just from this committee. This is coming from a wide array of creators who are concerned about the very same thing. And you've got that amendment from the Senate. So why not include it unless there's another agenda?
No, but that's where your party, not you personally, but the party and us, we disagree because we think that with the bill as is, it is excluded. They're excluded. They're totally excluded. And we said it, and the CRTC said it, there's no interest on the content, even if the content is great. But imagine, I said it, millions of videos uploaded every day. Who would be watching them if they were interested in the content? No one could, even if they were interested. Well, they're not. The only thing we need to know is what are the revenues, so we can base on that to say, okay, that platform has to contribute a certain percentage or amount to the creation of Canadian culture.
So the way that you defined it, though, the user platforms like YouTube or Facebook, along with their content, are included in your understanding. But the claim,
No.
the claim that the user content on these outlets somehow won't be impacted by C11, that's the claim that you're making. How do you square that circle?
But I don't see Facebook included in this. YouTube could be because sometimes people upload exactly the same thing that you would get on Spotify, for example, the same song. So if it's treated one way on Spotify, it should be treated the same way on YouTube. That's it. But on the rest, I don't think that's scoping
So
anyone else.
you can understand why this is confusing. Again, why not include it in the bill?
Because the bill is clear. The bill excludes them. That's why we had that discussion for over a year now.
It's
we
clear as
disagree
mud.
on.
But I'm going to move on.
respectfully disagree on that.
It's not really a disagreement. It's just that it's not clear. Minister, I want to go back to the case of Laith Maruth. That's the consultant who got at least $133,000 from the ministry that took over a month to do anything about, or frankly acknowledge from your office. So I want to know if that $133,000 has been paid back.
I'll turn to Madame Mondou because the same way that this was under me the first time I was Minister of Canadian Heritage and Multiculturalism. I'm not Minister of Multiculturalism anymore. It's Mr. Hussein, so I'll turn to Madame Mondou.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we are in recovery, and we are using two avenues. The first one is a recovery agency, and the other one is the CRA.
So still it hasn't been paid back. Has anybody faced consequences for hiring Laith Maruth? Has anybody been fired in a regular job, in a regular place? If you do something like that, there are consequences. Has anybody in the ministry at all faced consequences for the vile anti-Semitism and funding it by funding Laith Maruth?
So just to be clear, he was not hired by the department. The organization that hired him was receiving funding from the department. So he was not hired by the department. I think my colleague Maya has been here to explain that actually a lot of measures have been put in place to try to avoid that kind of event in the future, including by better screening, including by better monitoring, and also training. So people have been also provided on training. I have to say, in all honesty, that we are producing, I think the minister say 1.7 billion a year of Gs&C, and we have a lot of employees who are very, very devoted to do their work, and they do their best. Having said that, I am personally sorry for what happened, and I'm very, very, I can tell you that everybody in the department has been extremely, extremely sorry by it.
Thank you, Ms. Mondou. Thank you, Ms. Landsman. We'll move to the Liberal Party. Online, Michael Cotto. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. Minister, thank you so much for being here today and joining our committee. I've been on this committee and obviously in the House, and I've heard politicians talk about cutting funding to Radio Canada and cutting funding to public television. I grew up as we watched a lot of TV shows on public television, and in Ontario, we have TV Ontario, which we hold in high regards. in our province as well. But I think public television's a good thing for Canadians and for Ontarians. In regards to the rhetoric around cutting funding, what does that mean to you when you hear these things as the minister responsible for heritage in Canada?
I think it's very sad because of the importance of our public broadcaster. CBC Radio-Canada played and still playing a fundamental role in our country the same way BBC and others are playing in different other countries. It has a clear mandate to support language minorities across the country, francophones outside of Quebec, anglophones in Quebec. Look at the coverage, the quality of what they do internationally, and how they've helped Canadians understand the world throughout, decades. And it's among the best information there is, and when things happen outside of the borders of our country. So my first reaction is to say it's very sad. The second reaction is I'm not sure they understand what they're saying, because CBC Radio-Canada is one. It's got the same president, the same board, the same structure, the same head office, the same offices, the same cameras are used, the same microphones are used, the same editing rooms are used, quite often the same journalists. So it's quite often I will give an interview in French, and then the journalists will switch and ask me the same questions in English, or the opposite. They start in English. So when do you stop paying that person? If that same journalist is asking me a question in French and then switching to English, you stop paying the salary of that person because you say, no, in English you're not going to be paid there, you're not going to support you. It doesn't make any sense, because there's also CBC is committed on, there's the law on official languages that they have to respect also. And the message has been sent also by the opposition is saying to the Anglophone minority in Quebec, we don't care about you. Francophones outside of Quebec can have the services of Radio-Canada, but Anglophones in Quebec will not have access to CBC, which comes to the same sentiment that I had at the beginning. I find it very sad.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. In regards to, continuing on that thread around diversity and, just the vast regions of this great country, we have so many different communities that make up Canada. What is your department doing to ensure that our programs or services are connecting and supporting all communities across this country, with an emphasis on Indigenous and also just racialized minorities in this country? Can you comment on some of the strategies and programs that you've put in place in order to ensure that there's a balance out there?
Thank you, Mr. Cotto. Absolutely, we do it different ways. For example, for Indigenous people, one of the things I'm most proud of when I was Heritage Minister the first time is that we put in place the bill, C-91, Indigenous languages, that passed and that it became reality. Now the office is in place and we're supporting that. We now have bills with the 3 NIOs, with the Métis, with the First Nations, with the Inuit, to support them in their efforts to have their, in some cases, just simply their language survive. And this will help us not only to teach the language, but also to have more music, more television, more films in Indigenous people. This will help young Indigenous people be prouder of who they are, because they see themselves in all those productions. It's the same way for racialized people. C11, for example, is asking for the contribution, the money that we're getting to go, some of that money go to racialized, Indigenous, different underrepresented group. Why? Because it's the right thing to do.
Michael, your time is up.
Time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Minister. We'll move to 2.5 minutes now to the block. Mr. Champoux, you're up again.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I would like you to Tell me your opinion on the reaction, the attitude that we saw here on the part of representatives of Google and Meta regarding C18 during recent meetings that we had here with them in this committee. What was your reaction, and how will you address their style and appearance before us? Probably much as you are, Mr. Champoux. Most of us agree that there are actions that are undertaken which are unacceptable, that demonstrate a certain level of arrogance, I would say. Just because they're big and rich, that doesn't give them the right to come here and intimidate you or the Government of Canada, the opposition either, or the Senate, to tell any of us what to do here in our democracy. Google withdrawing of some Canadians' access to some of their news sources, well, that's profoundly disturbing, and there will be follow-up. There will be business decisions made. They make a lot of money here, both those companies here in Canada. We'll see. Such behavior threatens our democracy. Do you think that if they go forward on their threats, Meta or Google or even both of them, do you have the impression that this potential lack of funding to our media could be painful? Do you think it would make us even more vulnerable? Small media, small news outlets and so on, who are already facing a lot of difficulties. Yes, it might be an extra challenge. Right now, the way you can distribute your news is or access news is going online, clicking, and being, channeled to one side or another. Canada brought this issue up. Australia as well has taken action, and in the United States as well. France, England, Great Britain rather, and Europe. This is an ongoing discussion everywhere, so we'll have to find the right way to deal with these web giants. Small media outlets, those who aren't affiliated in large groups, they are having difficulty transforming to a digital economy. They haven't the means to do so effectively. Is the government going to help them to transition to the digital age? Isn't that something you might consider? Help them become more efficient and effective in the digital world. This is something we are considering. There are many examples of excellent media outlets who haven't been able to transition or transition quickly enough and are having trouble surviving. There are a number of programs available as well. When I was Minister of Canadian Heritage the first time around, I'm very proud of the 600,000 that we brought down then, 50,000 rather, for local media and newsrooms and so on. And as you say, we should look at other ways to come to their assistance. Thank you very much. I think we can agree on that.
Julian of the New Democratic Party.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. We all owe you. I just wanted to reiterate the importance on the case of Laith Malouf that the money is being reclaimed, though I do believe, given that there are members of the Conservative caucus that met with a vile anti-Semitic and Islamophobic neo-Nazi, that it's a bit rich coming from the Conservatives, any lessons around anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. That being said, I wanted to come to the issue of copyright. We've had a number of organizations that are looking to update the Copyright Act. It is a little unclear who is taking that on, and it is a little unclear what the timelines are. Can you update us on this badly needed update to the Copyright Act, and how much of that is on your desk and how much is on other ministers' desks?
That's a great question, Mr. Julian. I had the opportunity to be critic of this same portfolio when I was in opposition for a couple of years, and at that moment we were updating the Copyright Act, and it was also always discussions between industry and heritage in the side of the government, and on my side in the opposition. I'm sure that you have this type of discussion, me, and at the time was Mr. Garneau, I think, industry critic. So we're both involved. In what percentage, hard to say. We have to come to agreements, but it's clear that that we have to move, and it's very important. It's always delicate, complicated to move forward on that bill, but it's a priority for us. It's something we want to move forward.
Okay, now is this something else that we're expecting in the fall? So funding for CBC, the online harms, and this? Are these
but
all
Mr.
things?
Julian, we're not even in the second year. It's been a year and a half or something, and we've done a lot. So now the other stuff is coming, including copyright and online hate.
Okay, can I ask you when?
I don't
What's
have
the
a date.
deadline?
I don't have a date.
This year?
I can't tell you. No.
Okay. Well, we will
As soon as
certainly.
possible. Because when it only depends on me, it's easier. But when it depends on discussions that you have to have with other departments and other ministers, then you don't control everything. So that's why I cannot give you a more precise answer.
Okay, thank you. I wrote to you just a few days ago around Cactus, the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations, and their funding issue around the local journalism initiative, and that is they're experiencing a lot of complications. This is important. C18, as you pointed out, is to incite, encourage local journalism. Do you have an update on responding to the needs of these local organizations that are just trying to put into place local journalism initiatives?
Well, there's two things that is there to support them. That C18 that's coming hopefully soon, depending on what's going on in the Senate, and also the fund, the special fund that I said, the $50 million that are there to support them. So.
Okay, Minister.
I owe you as well, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you for the extra time.
We'll move now to 5 minutes with the Conservatives. Mr. Shields. Martin, you're on the floor.
For Minister being here and the officials today. I know you made the comment about Meta and those as the big rich guys, but the advertising, and we've talked about this before, that the federal government does, $24 million in 2020 went to the big guys, the big rich guys. It's up to $51 million, headed for $64 million in 21-22. That's the advertising that this government does on the international platforms outside of this country. So a little bit of that is you give them money and want to take some back. But the media independent non-daily papers in my region say they used to get 30% of their revenue from federal government funding. Now they get virtually zero. Why do you favor the international big platforms and send the money out of the country where you could be supporting advertising in our own country? Not subsidy, but advertising.
I think you're raising a very, very good point, and there are different programs for those papers, and they play a fundamental role. Mr. Shields, you'll agree with that. And the problem, and why do we have C18? It's because those papers are disappearing. Over 460 media, big and small, regional cities, whatever, all of that disappeared in the last 10, 15 years. So why? Because all the money is migrating to those big players, and this is what we're trying to come back to a fairer system where the government has no say. We're just putting in place like a table in the middle, and we're having the tech giants with all the players, including the small ones like yours, that can negotiate collectively and come to the table.
Zero.
Well, but the bill is not in place.
No. They're getting zero now.
No,
So
that's why we have to pass the bill.
I'm talking the advertising dollars is gone. You've decided to give it to international big rich guys rather than advertise in our own local. It's gone. You've made a decision as a federal government to advertise with the big rich guys instead of advertising in our non-daily papers. It's gone. The non-daily papers say, put the advertising back where you used to spend our money instead of sending it out of the country to the big rich guys as you identify it.
Well, yes, I think that we have to look at possibilities of supporting more those small players, but also, as I said, there are programs that they have access to.
No, not subsidies. Not subsidies. They don't want subsidies.
But it's not. I mean, there are programs. It's not a subsidy in the sense of a subsidy.
Yeah, it is a subsidy. When you give it a program and don't advertise, it's a subsidy.
There are different programs to support them. Why? Because their work is extremely important.
And I agree, it's really critical, because I got about 13 and most of them
they're
independent in my
fundamental.
writing. Independent, so
And
they're
they're
not represented by
disappearing.
anybody. They're not represented by anybody. They got zero out of whatever funds is coming out of the 600 million. They got zero out of that 600 million. Zero. Big zero.
I mean,
Nothing. Those 13 got nothing. The big tech guys haven't contacted them to give them any money out of the 300 million either. They admitted that here, and I've contacted
okay, but the
them.
600 million is not available for the big tech. This is only for
And
our regular.
13 weekly papers in my writing got zero. Zero. Do you understand? Zero? They didn't get it, so who got it?
No. But what I'm saying
got
is
the
that
600
those
million?
programs are not accessible to the big tech giants. It's
Who
not
got
for
it?
them.
Who got that 600 million?
Different medias across the
No,
country,
no, 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 no.
newsrooms.
Not
big,
mine, not the
Yes,
13 weekly, non-daily
Well,
papers.
I understand, Mr. Shields, that not yours, but big, I mean, think about the media, big or small, in different regions, radio, television, and papers. They're getting some of money of those
No.
programs. No, but they are.
No,
Yes.
no.
No.
And you don't understand that. They're not getting it.
You're telling me your 13 papers are not getting it. I
No,
fully
they're
understand that.
independent. They're independent. They don't belong to groups. They're not getting it.
But
That's what you fundamentally have missed time and time again over the years.
Mr.
They
Shield,
don't get it.
the
And
600
that's why
million
they're
is
shutting
going to
down.
local media, but one of the benefits of C18 is collective bargaining. So you can have a lot of them, even if they're not represented by anyone, get together, which they done in Australia, and in percentage in Australia, proportionally, small media got more than the big ones, proportionally speaking.
So most of that money's already been negotiated away, the 300 million. Most of it, we've heard 75 to 80%, even for your officials.
I'm sorry, I don't know what
have
the
said it's
300
already
million
gone.
is. C'est quoi ça, le 300? Oh, C18.
It's already gone. It's already been
But
negotiated
the bill,
away.
no, the bill's not even passed.
It's already been negotiated. Your
No.
officials have told us that.
No.
Your officials sitting here have told us that.
No.
In committee, they've told us that.
But, can you?
Very quickly, Mr. Ripley, if you don't mind.
So, Mr. Shields, I believe you're likely referencing the fact that there are existing agreements in place, and C18 does provide a transition mechanism for those agreements to be taken into account. But once C18 does receive royal assent, you know, the CRTC will have to assess whether platforms have done enough against the criteria set out in the bill to assess whether those existing agreements are sufficient or not. And the government's perspective would be that right now they're probably disproportionately with the bigger players, and as you note, more needs to be done to support the smaller players.
And it's going to include the small.
Okay. We're going to move on. Thank you, Mr. Shields, for that. We'll move to the Liberal Party. 5 minutes, Lisa Hepner.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and our other guests for being here today. Minister, I've spent, even in this past week, just a couple of days ago, I was at the sold-out fundraiser for the Art Gallery of Hamilton, which I'm sure you know is one of the biggest and best art galleries in all of the country, a place that was lined up down the street with people dying to get back in once they reopened during the pandemic. I've also recently visited a couple of TV shows that are being filmed in Hamilton. That's an industry that didn't shut down at all during the pandemic. All very grateful for the supports from your department. Also have met with people who put on local festivals in Hamilton. Also grateful for supports. But not everybody has recovered entirely from the pandemic. It's still difficult, and crowds have changed. Things like people don't plan anymore, so they don't buy their tickets to an event until the very last minute. So it's very hard for, say, music producers to know how many people or how much they can pay or, you know, to put on their event. Everything has changed. Could you reflect on that for us a little? You mentioned that one of the first things you did in this session as minister was hold a national summit on the arts, culture, and heritage. So tell us what you've heard from artists lately, and what does the future of arts look like in Canada?
That's a big question. I'm not sure any of us has the full answer to that. We know, understand that there's many challenges. One of the things that we got out of that summit, which is a huge success, by the way, we had 400 people coming from all over the country, other hundreds of people on the screen, and big, discussion and debates, is the precarity. How do you say precarity? Like the fragility of a lot of our workers. And the arts and culture sector was one of the most hit during the pandemic, especially the live arts, right? And you think about it, you had venues, right? And you had a gig, you play guitar. Let's say Mr. Lewis had a gig, he was playing at a certain venue, and the venue would say, oh, no, sorry, COVID rules, you're not playing. And then the COVID rules change. And oh, by the way, yes, you can play next week. And then they change again. So we lost a lot of people because these people that had contracts here and there are also parents. They also have to pay either the mortgage, the rent, put food on the table, dress, clothes for the kids and all of that. So because of that instability, we lost a lot of people. So we have to look at ways how to offer more stability to that sector. Can we do stuff, for example, through EI? And so how can we help also the venues to encourage people to come back? We put in place some of those programs. I think for a while people were still concerned about COVID going in a room full of people. I think people are a bit more reassured now, but not fully. So it brings supplementary challenges. So, and at the same time, you discuss live events, then you also discuss the future of television, of movies. So the way to approach this is have to inclusive approach where we have programs for the live sector, we have C11 for our culture sector, we have C18 for news and media newsrooms, and the most important thing I think it is to listen and learn from them, because I'm only the minister, right? We have some tools as a department and some money, definitely a good will to change and help. But they're the people that know are the people that are doing the stuff on the ground.
Very good. And as you know, I'm a former broadcast journalist and have spoken to many stakeholders about C18. I was very honored to play a big role in helping shape that legislation, work on that legislation here at this committee. And the Canadian Association of Broadcasters was just here on the Hill a couple of weeks ago. And all I'm hearing now from those stakeholders is thank you for getting through C18. When will it take effect? So please tell us about the next steps for C18. We know it's at the Senate right now. Is there a date when we can expect it to actually take effect?
Part of the answer is in the hands of our friends at the Conservative Party, because it depends what they do. Last time they took a lot of time. They want to really reflect on C11. I think they did that. Now are they going to really reflect on C18? C18, I think C18 in a way is a game changer for our independent media newsrooms. I said it before, and please keep reflecting on this, the importance of independent press, a free press, a non-partisan press, in all different ways, fighting disinformation, informing Canadians, searching for the truth. They are professionals that devoted all their lives, but now the money has gone to the big tech, and now we have to find something that is more fair for the system. Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
That's fine. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Lisa. We go now to Ms. Gladue for 5 minutes. We've started the third round. Probably have time also for the fourth round here. So.
Well, thank you, Chair. And first of all, Minister, let me say that I'm very surprised to hear that you did not follow Chrystia Freeland's advice and cancel your Disney Plus subscription to help balance your household budget. I also did not take her advice because I, too, like The Mandalorian. Anyway, I want to move along and talk about a couple of things. First of all, the National Gallery. There is a lot of stuff going on there. There's been, 14 people dismissed. There's talk that they can't fulfill their mandate. Then there's people are upset about a $300,000 contract for an outside consultant. Can you tell us, what is happening at the National Gallery and what is your office doing in order to try to bring that to a resolution?
As you did, I followed that very closely because it's a very important institution. It's a place that I always loved to go all my life. I would come from Montreal or Sherbrooke when I grew up and to visit the gallery. But I don't manage internally what's going on at the gallery. But I do make nominations, and we're about to name the person that will lead the gallery very soon. It's coming in the next few weeks. And we hope that it's going to stabilize the institution.
Very good, thank you. Also, in your mandate letter, it's mentioned that you need to do work to support faith-based communities across the country. And we have seen more than 68 Christian churches burned to the ground or vandalized or desecrated here in Canada, as well as many Jewish synagogues, some mosques, and other religious places of worship. So I would be interested to know what actions that you have taken as part of your mandate to ensure that people can freely worship whatever denomination they are.
I think that's very important, but it's not in my mandate letter, Ms. Gladue. So maybe if I turn to Madame Modou.
I think you, Mr. President, I think you're referring to the program that public safety has to help support those communities to stay safe and those places to be secure. And you probably saw in budget 2023 that this program was bonified, so there are going to be more money for people to be able to protect the community, protect the faith-based institution, and that's our colleagues at Public Safety that are doing that important work. It was
in the 2022 mandate letter for the minister that I was looking at, and it said part of supporting the preservation of culture was faith-based communities. So I just wondered what activities were going on with respect to that.
Can follow up. We're not quite sure, but happy to follow up.
Good. If there are things, then please forward them to the committee. Now, let's turn to the different museums. I noticed that, we've got the Museum of History, Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, Museum of Nature, Museum of Science and Technology. And if we look at the estimates, we can see that the funding has not increased. In fact, for many of these, it's decreased, and they are concerned about their ability to continue to operate. And so I wondered what the government is doing, what the minister is doing to help these organizations move to a place where they could be financially self-sustainable ultimately. I mean, these are great places to go, and, there are business models out there that would say they should be able to sustain themselves, and we certainly don't want to lose them. So I'd be interested if the minister could comment about that.
Thank you for raising the importance of those museums. You're absolutely right. And whenever I get the chance either to go in Winnipeg to the Human Rights Museum or Pier 21, and I'm sure you guys do the same, it allows me to say that for the first time in a very long time, we increased the budget by 53 million in the last budget. Maybe, Monsieur Doiron, I don't know if you want to give more details about it, but I think one of the very good news in that last budget was that 53 million, because for years and years, those important institutions has not received supplementary funding. Now they do. I don't know if there's anything to add to that.
One other thing that I want to know then is we had Meta and Google here and talking about the reaction that they would make if C11 in its current form passed. They would likely block the ability to stream news that way. And so I know that Australia had discussions with them when they were going through their legislation. Have you had similar discussions to come to some resolution so the Canadians don't lose their access through Meta and Google?
I think you're referring to C18, Madame Gladue. We've had many discussions with, like, those who know me know that my door is always open, and a lot of them have my cell phone. And I'm always ready to discuss with them, with their representative, and my team and our public servants have been discussing with them all the time. And my door is still open. I don't like this confrontational impression of, we may disagree on stuff, but there's still a lot of stuff we can do together. So my door is still open to see if we can discuss.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Gladue. We'll move to the Liberal Party. Tim Lewis for 5. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate this and another chance to talk again. Minister, you mentioned in the mandate the idea of holding a national summit of the arts, culture, and heritage. And you did that, and I was very appreciative. It was a few months ago, and I was very glad to be part of it, and it was a very important and a very powerful and constructive debate that we had on arts in general. talking about how arts is a mirror for social change and bringing the whole cultural industry together, our artists, our creatives. I think that was a very important and timely thing. So I really appreciate that. We had lots of new ideas. There was new innovation and a new energy. You can feel a new energy in the entire cultural system. With our museums, we've talked about music, books, film, theaters, even the internet as well. So I was wondering if you can tell me what you got out of that the National Summit, and expand on some of the things that we discussed and what you learned from that.
Well, one of the things, first of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Lewis, for your contribution, not only in this committee, but in different conversations. And you're an artist yourself, and I have a lot to learn from you, and I think we have a lot to learn from you. You know your stuff probably more than all of us. So thank you very much for what you've done, like the same way like Ms. Hefner knows the media sector extremely well, and it's been extremely helpful to have us with us to prepare C18. One of the things that was probably the most important is that just seeing each other at that summit. Remember, that was in the middle of a pandemic, or it was a year ago in the month of May, and it was cute to see our faces on screens, but the fact that we gathered 400 people from all over the country, specialists in museums, in music, in movies, in television, books, that was simply amazing. Just the human contact, and they have the chance to share our point of view, to share our best experiences. There's things that were done in BC that we could learn from, other things that were done in Quebec that we could learn from, and I think that was the perfect summer forum in a way to share those experiences, but also the challenges of the future. As I was discussing earlier today, the fragility, or I don't know, of the sector, the jobs, the instability. How can we help these people that want to follow their passion, not to have to leave their job, go in a restaurant or anywhere else? I mean, they're all good jobs, but they're not doing what they love. They're not doing what is their passion. How can we help them do that? How can we offer more support, comfort, and stability to a mother that is a ballet dancer, but doesn't have the stability required to, pay the mortgage and the rent and this and that? So I think that it was very welcomed by all the sectors. I think all of us learned quite a lot, and that helped us also put in place some of the programs that followed to help in terms of support for the pandemic.
I thank you, and I think some of the things I took out of it was there are larger organizations, and then there are smaller organizations, lots of self-employed and small companies, theater companies, that all need that support at the same time. So I was very happy to hear that discussion happening at all levels, and the potential, the challenges that we faced, and then to overcome the pandemic in a culture that is asking to bring people together, and all of a sudden now was not able to do that. So those are the challenges we had to overcome, but there are also some potential gains that we can make moving forward. And I think that the legislation like C11 and C18 were going to be very important to modernize how we're supporting our cultural sector. So I do appreciate that. We talked about C18 supporting papers. I wondered if you could just expand on it, because in my writing in Kitchener-Conestoga, we have those small weekly papers, and they are feeling the lack of advertising ads and having trouble keeping on staff and staying afloat. So can you just expand on that notion, how those small papers are going to be supported by C18, and maybe using Australia as an example of how legislation similar to this has worked in other countries?
Quickly, Minister, if you don't mind.
It's part of the solution, but not the whole solution. C18 will help those small papers because they can negotiate, they can have a collective bargaining negotiations, this gives them way more strength to sit at the same table as giants like Google and Facebook. But there is also the periodical fund that they have access to. They have access to the credit for newsrooms, the 600 million. So there's the series of programs, and we're looking how to help them even more because they're fundamental to our democracy. Even the smaller one, they all have their role to play.
They do. Mr. Shampoo for 2.5.
On fait comme tantôt, Monsieur le Président.
The same 2.5 minutes I had earlier, Chair. So, Mr. Shields brought up an issue. I'd like to get back to it. It's among the issues that I want to address, the investments of the government, federal government, in advertising and media. I discussed this in the past. 2023, we're still at it. Nothing's being done. The federal government advertising is mostly bought from Google, Facebook, other large social media outlets, while the government is trying to trying to counter or deal with these web giants. We're still paying them to carry our advertising, leaving small media at a loss. Tens of thousands of dollars in these large companies. I don't understand. When we ask about it, we're told that each individual department manages its own advertising, that their agents decide where to advertise. Their aim is to reach as many Canadians as possible and so forth, and therefore the media giants get the money. So I would like us to avoid pointing the finger at others. I'd like someone, namely Canadian Heritage, to say this is senseless. Tens of thousands of dollars every year, small media should get it. Every week, a new small newsroom has to close down. They're unable to provide us with the good journalism they're capable of. So I would like to hear you today say that, yes, we'll do something to ensure that federal government advertising is spent on our own media outlets, Quebecois and Canadian outlets that are having trouble surviving and that need that money, need that advertising funding. I'd like to hear you on this. Are you ready to do something? Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. And we are doing something about it. C18 is part of the answer. But look, advertising, though, the advertising that the federal government pays for, well, we pretty much don't do any out of our department. But look, directives come down from the Treasury Board. It's not Canadian Heritage that makes these decisions. I'm happy to talk to them about it. I agree with you that there may be better ways of involving small media, but you are the ones who can speak for them. You're the one who hears their complaints. You're the one who can bring this message to the Council of Ministers, to the Privy Council, and so on. Will you bring this up at the question period? No, I won't, but it's been heard here, indeed, and I hear you, and I will follow up on this.
Mr. Julian, 2.5 to you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to get back to the Fine Arts Museum, the National Museum here in Ottawa. For a number of years now, there was some difficulty at the management level. They lost a lot of employees, even high-placed employees. Now, Mr. Rodriguez, you've told us that there's going to be a new leader there. What criteria have you used to select this new leader? What are the main characteristics that you are looking for to ensure that our National Museum becomes a National Arts Museum, National Gallery of Canada, becomes a source of pride once again for Canadians? That's a very good question. We've spent a good deal of time discussing this. We're looking for someone who has experience in museology, who is recognized and respected as a museologist, respected by their peers. Second, being respected and by and known to donors, being credible, in their interactions with donors and potential donors. 3, someone with a good deal of experience in personnel management and a track record demonstrating that they're able to manage a large number of people at once, despite challenges, and get through rough periods and pull the group through. And fourth, their wish to do the job. And have you selected the person? We're nearly there. So we're waiting for an announcement? Yes, shortly. Mr. Champoux, I'll let you know.
Arts programs right across the country. Because when we look at the estimates, we see a decrease of $24.8 million for the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, a decrease of $7.7 billion for the Building Communities Through Arts and Heritage Program. We see a decrease of $6.9 million for the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. Generally, decreases mean that the regions, including mine, which is thousands of kilometers from the major arts centre in Eastern Canada, but in British Columbia, we tend to suffer when there are the cuts. So how do you justify the cuts in all of those programs at a time when, as you mentioned in your initial presentation, Mr. Minister, we need arts and culture to unite us more than ever?
I agree. I mean, some of the cuts, well, not cuts, but were related, and we had that discussion before, to the end of some of the pandemic programs. And we knew ahead of time, we said it before, and it had an end, and it ended at that moment. So that had an impact. But some of the programs were renewed. For example, the $7 million a year, so $14 million for 2 years for the small festivals. There's money going to tourism that will include the big festival, the big events, and I agree with you. The support of the government is fundamental for those organizations.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Julian. 5 minutes, Ms. Gladue.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, Minister, you said that faith-based communities was not in your mandate letter. So I'm looking at the December 16th, 2021 mandate letter that is out on the web for the Minister of Heritage, and it says, as Minister, I expect you to include and collaborate with various communities and actively seek out and incorporate in your work the diverse views of Canadians. This includes women, Indigenous peoples, Black and racialized Canadians, newcomers, faith-based communities, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ Canadians, and in both official languages. So if you weren't aware that was in there, what I would say is we've had 68 Christian churches burned to the ground, multiple attacks on synagogues and places of worship. I would ask that your government take some action. I'll turn the rest of the questioning to my colleague, Martin.
Well, the way I understood it is that you were talking specifically if we had a program for what happened to the churches, which is totally unacceptable, but I would bring it to other level, and this is why we need a bill such as the one that's coming, the online safety bill, because a lot of it, not everything, but a lot of it starts on the web. A lot of these people organize on the web. A lot of people start their action organizing on the web, and that should not be there. People have to be protected when they go and practice their faith, or 100%. And we have a role to play, and I think that through the online safety bill is going to play an important role too.
You made a comment earlier, Mr. Minister, and I really appreciate you here in presence, because face-to-face is critical. You and I may differ in our opinion, but I will fight to the death that you have your opinion, although I may disagree with it.
Of course.
But I appreciate being in person, because we've missed that. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer, going back to a previous question I asked, said Bill C-18, the majority of the revenues have already been made deals with CBC, Rogers, and Bell. That's the PBO has said that. Now, I know your staff is saying CRTC is going to take a look and see if that's representative. So, but do you understand that the PBO has said the majority of money has already been made in deals to CBC, Rogers, and Bell?
No, but if I may, now I understand. Now I understand where the confusion comes from. There are some bills in place for some of the big players, but none or very few with the small players. Now, for the big giant tech giants to be exempted from the bill,
No.
They will have to have deals.
I'm talking about the big ones in Canada, the big medium ones in Canada
but
have already got the deals made.
Okay, but
you understand where the money is.
First, C18 is not in place, okay? So it's a game changer.
Got that. But they've
Second,
made the deals knowing it's coming.
with some of them, absolutely. We know that.
Right.
Perfect. But, and you know why some of those deals were made? Because they knew that C18 was coming.
Right. Just so we
But-
understand that the majority of the money has already been done.
Because they have to have deals with the ecosystem. So you cannot have, let's say, Google arrive and say, okay, have a deal with Toronto
CBC.
Star,
Yeah.
CBC, and this, and I'm excluded. No, that doesn't work like that. Because you need to have deals in every province with big players, small players, rural, cities. So
Sure.
if you don't have that, you're not exempted.
And then there'll be a few cents left on the table, is what I'm saying. There'll
Sorry?
be a few cents left on the table, because most of the money's
But,
already.
but there's no top. We don't know the amount. We don't know the total. So it's impossible to say, 50% of the amount has been taken, or 25 or 75, because there's no top.
Oh, yeah, right,
It-
okay. I'm just going by the journalists who we
Yeah.
say are doing good work, saying how much money's on the table, because they've done their research and they know.
But it depends on the deals that are going to be negotiated.
Okay.
It's impossible for us to say how much money there will
Let's go
be.
to the National Arts Center over here, which I'm a frequent participant.
Yeah.
I like live, right?
We'll go together someday.
I would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And when I turn in a car, my radio is a Virgin radio because I never turn on a radio in a car. But I met with the indigenous staff that's over there that's been hired, right? They said there was just money to hire 2 staff, but not to do any programming. What's the point of having just 2 indigenous staff over there, but yet no money for programming?
We have to get back to you because I don't manage internally what they do with their funds.
But I mean, it's like C91, which you referred to earlier. I was there for C91 when it got jammed through right at the end. How long did it take to appoint the 3 commissioners for that?
That was under my predecessor, so a while, but the commission is in place, the commissioner is there, and they have the 3 directors, and things are working out now.
Now, can you tell me how much of the money of that $300 million has gone out to the indigenous organizations?
We're distributing, I mean, how much money is there per year? Because now we changed the way we work, Mr. Shields. Before, we would imagine everything, and we receive projects and we send money. And the basis of the bill is not that, it's the opposite. It's that you guys...
I know the bill, I was there.
Okay, no, but
Martin.
it's to say, you guys know better than us what to do with it. So we made 3 specific deals with the 3 NIOs. We gave them the money, and they distribute it on their projects.
How much of that money is out the door?
Okay, thank you, Martin. Your time is up. We'll go to Mr. Biddle for the Liberals for 5.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I know Monsieur Champoux asked this question in French, but wondering if you could address it in English as well. We've seen at this committee, and even around the world, the contempt that Facebook or Meta and Google have for the democratic process, not even just in Canada, but Australia, even in the United States. Refusing to bring witnesses, evasive answers, threatening members of parliament, threatening to take away news from Canadians. Wondering if you can comment as Minister on the actions of the tech giants.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing on the important bills also. And no, but I mean, you've done a lot on the consultations and all of that, and for replacing me in the last days when I couldn't be here. I'm worried, Mr. Biddle, and as everyone around this table should be worried, wherever the color of the party, if we run for office, it's because we believe in democracy, it's because we have the privilege to be representing people and voting. So when a big tech company, whatever the size, the amount of money, and the powerful lawyers that they have, they come here and they tell us, well, if you don't do this or that, then, I'm pulling the plug or I'm going to do this. That's a threat. And that is unacceptable. And that, in my opinion, should be equally unacceptable for all of us, whatever the political color is here and also in the Senate. And what Google did by cutting access to information to a certain percentage of Canadians, that's unacceptable. And I never did anything because I was afraid of a threat, and I will never do.
Excellent. Thank you, Minister. And go back. I would like to take us back a bit to the C11 debate, and it's almost at times that we're having this parallel discussion in terms of what's happening in reality, what's actually in the bill, and what we hear in the House of Commons, especially from the Conservative Party. And we even heard a little bit today when there was a suggestion that the CRTC, which is independent, is looking into Fox News, which is interesting. Conservatives are standing up for Fox News. But to suggest that it was related to C11, even though it was an independent complaint made by Egal Canada with respect to rights for the treatment of the LGBTQ2 plus community, and the CRTC is independently investigating that, and the suggestion that this is censorship via C11, I was wondering if you can comment on, again, like this parallel debate that leads into misinformation on C11.
Well, it has nothing to do to be, I don't know what else I can say. There's absolutely no link between C11 and the decisions the CRTC or the consultations are making on this. Zero link.
Even building upon that, I try to suggest, and constituents I have conversations with when they hear this online, that we're going to go to YouTube or Spotify. We're still going to listen and watch what we want. I was wondering if you could comment on what the actual effect for the person sitting in front of their computer screen, what it's going to look like for your average Canadian.
Nothing. It's not going to. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're asking the streamers is to contribute to the creation of Canadian content and to make sure that they showcase some of the stuff that we do, because we do great stuff in terms of music, of movies, and cinema. But they can do it online. They can do it offline. They can put big panels on the side of the road and say, hey, watch this show. It's absolutely amazing. Or on their website, advertise some of the things they do in terms of Canadian creation of Canadian content. But at the end of the day, you, Mr. Biddle, and only you will decide what you watch. That's it.
But I won't decide what other people watch. I want to make that that clear. It's a limited role that I have as parliamentary secretary. Thank you so much, Minister. I just have a few seconds, but again, like I'd like to highlight your point in terms of, even if we wanted to, there's tens or hundreds of millions of videos uploaded a day, even just on one streaming site, YouTube, and there's so few employees at the CRTC that it wouldn't even be possible to participate in the to engage in the conspiracy theories if they were true, even though they continue to be propagated by the opposition. So I think my time is up, but I do want to say thank you for being here, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. I'm going to make an arbitrary decision. We've got 22 minutes to the hour. So, Minister and department officials, if you don't mind, we would like to do a short fourth round because you have committed to us till 1 o'clock. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give the Conservatives and Liberals 5 minutes each, and the NDP and the Bloc 2.5. I know. But that's what we'll do. And then we have some voting on the main estimates. Both of you have received generous time from Mr. Waugh today. Anyways, let's go 5 minutes, Ms. Lanceman for the Conservatives.
Sure. Thanks. I want to go back to the policy directive that hasn't been issued and the fact that the CRTC has launched consultations or will be launching consultations. And I think it's confusing for Canadians to understand what those consultations about. And I understand that you're going to say that the CRTC is at arm's length, but what do you think those consultations are about if there's no policy directives on the table?
I don't work with the CRTC on what they're doing at that moment. What I'm working on is making sure that I come up with the draft policy as soon as possible. From what I understand is that they're consulting generally more broadly, and that those consultations will be adapted when they receive.
So they're just consulting?
They are consulting on C11, but on the general aspect of the transformational, because there's already a lot of stuff that we know. We know that we're modernizing a lot that should have been modernized a long time ago. So they're looking at that, and then they're going to receive the policy directions. They're going to adapt it to that.
Has there been any political staff that has met with the CRTC with regards to any of the directives?
Not me. No? I don't think so.
I don't think so, or no?
No.
Okay. So recently, I'll tell you why I'm asking. Recently, the CRTC published a webpage. It was called Myths and Facts. I'm sure you've seen it. It's probably come up in your media monitoring since you have made it better after the Laith Maruth case. On this page, the CRTC called concerns held by the opposition and, frankly, content creators, academics, everybody that we heard that talked about C11, and frankly, they've characterized them as myths. Now, it only takes a little bit of critical thinking to see that the facts espoused by the CRTC on that website are directly parroting the talking points that you have used as a minister on C11. So I want to know if there was any formal instruction to the CRTC on any of this.
No, not at all. And no, but.
So was it something that the CRTC did on its own?
But if something is not, Ms. Lassaman, if something is not true, it's very possible that I say it's not true and they say it's not true because it's not a fact. And I think one of the problems around the debate on C11, if there's a lot of things that were not facts and they had nothing to do with the bill, they're like zero. Freedom of expression has nothing to do with C11. It's a parallel discussion that some people wanted to initiate, so they would not discuss about the bill. The bill is simply asking the streamers to contribute to Canadian culture.
You could see why Canadians, academics, content creators, everybody that had an issue with the bill sees the CRTC consulting widely without policy directives that you said Parliament would see, and then sees the parroting on a website that is directly the same talking points that you used. You could see why that would concern Canadians, correct?
Well, you can look at it that way, but once again, if there are things that were not true in terms of discussion, and I say that they can say it if they want. I mean, I don't speak to them, and they're totally independent, and I always respect that. It's one of the fundamental things in our democracy to respect the independence of those institutions.
Thank you. Minister, I just want to finish up by talking about funding for sport. You know the committee is undertaking a study of safe sport, and I see that you have about $265 million in the budget. I'm concerned because Hockey Canada has only implemented 6 of its 36 recommendations, and they're receiving funding again. And the Minister of Sport, after hearing from all of the athletes that they wanted a public inquiry, has not come with that and has instead come with Sports Canada having an accountability mechanism when they were identified by all of the athletes as being part of the problem and not part of the solution. So I wanted to know if you could tell us how much, if any, of that $265 million in your budget is going to support the Minister of Sports initiatives.
Well, I guess you probably invited the Minister for Sports to come here to discuss the estimates, because it's under her, it's not under me. So if you didn't, guys, invite her. It's.
Do you want to do one more? Yep. Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that none of your funds is going towards that. Could you tell us then what the funding under sport from Heritage is going to?
I don't touch sport, I'm sorry, but I'd love to. I'm a big hockey fan, soccer fan, I practice a lot of stuff.
But there's $265 million in the Department of Heritage budget that says sport.
I'll turn to Mr. Doiron.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The sports program is under the Department of Canadian Heritage, but its Minister Saint-Ange is actually responsible for those funds.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gladue. We're going to move on as we're going to welcome Mr. Housefather virtually. Anthony, you got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Kevin. Merci à Monsieur le Ministre. Et je veux vous offrir.
Thank you to the Minister, and I too wish to say how sad I am to hear of the passing of your father. It's really kind of you to join us at this time. I would like to begin with a question about CBC Radio-Canada. It's been touched on by some of my colleagues here in the room. Here's the question. If someone were to tell you that you could offer funds to Radio-Canada in French but not to CBC in English, what would the problem be? Is there equipment that they share, for example? Are there journalists that they share, especially outside of Quebec? So what would the effect of that be, of funding allotted to one language only? It's a very good question. I don't understand what the official opposition is trying to do with this issue. I was saying earlier that CBC Radio-Canada is a single institution. They have one fund to be used across CBC Radio-Canada. They have one president, one board of directors, and they have offices across the country used by both CBC and Radio-Canada. Here, for example, I'm often asked a question in French by a journalist, and then she'll say, could you repeat your answer in English, or she'll put another question in the other language.
Questions in French, not in English. Les studios de montage, lorsqu'on va, que ce soit ici, lorsque vous traversez la rue, vous allez faire une entrevue à CBC Radio-Canada.
So here, if you go for an interview across the street here in Parliament, the guard at the door is the same. The infrastructure is the same. It's the same newsroom. So I have no idea what they're up to by trying to drive a wedge with this. That's step one, Mr. Housefather. And you, of course, will understand that this would be withdrawing a fundamental right from the minority languages groups in Quebec. Much as Radio-Canada represents an important resource for Francophone minority groups outside of Quebec, what the opposition seems to be saying is that, we don't care. We don't care about the Anglophone community of Quebec, the minority there. We'll just cut their access to news in English, and we'll do that by cutting their access to our national broadcaster.
Thank you for that, Minister, because what you're saying is absolutely true. People think of the English-speaking community in Quebec as being only the English-speaking community in Montreal that is well served by institutions, and forget that we have remote English-speaking communities in the Gaspé, in the North Shore, in Trois-Rivières, in Quebec City, and Abitibi. And those people make use of CBC. And CBC radio, CBC television are pretty much the rare things that they get unless they have satellite. So thank you for always standing up for our community as well. I wanted to also come back to, you've been getting some questions about sports, about diversity and inclusion, and there's a confusion because, of course, you're the Minister of Canadian Heritage, but there are other ministers that are responsible for portions of the budget in Canadian Heritage. Could you just clarify that? Because I think it has to be made clear you're not responsible for diversity and inclusion, you're not responsible for sports.
Vous savez, la façon dont fonctionne.
You know, the way the government works is as follows. It's the Prime Minister's prerogative to assign or delegate responsibilities to members of his cabinet, or her cabinet, if it should be a woman. So as in 2018, I was told, Mr. Minister, you will be in charge of heritage and multiculturalism. That's why, with great pride, I traveled across Canada to draw up an anti-racism strategy. But when I came back this time, multiculturalism was not assigned to me. It's Mr. Roussel and who has it? Madame Saint-Onge has sport, and Ms. Petipa has official languages, even though it's all, in a sense, part of Canadian heritage. In a certain sense, the actual responsibility for day-to-day management and signing rights and so on are provided to these specific ministers who are not myself. So I'm not responsible on a day-to-day basis and have nothing to do with that programming at present.
And that's why I just wanted to clarify that, because I know, for example, that you're passionate about sports, especially soccer. I know you're passionate about religious minority communities in Canada. You've often talked to me about anti-Semitism and other communities, protection of churches, protection of all of the things that have been raised today. I know you are passionate about. And, and I don't want people to think that just because you're not responsible, you don't care about these things. I know you deeply care about them. And so I don't want to, I think, Mr. Chair, my time is up. I just wanted to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much,
Housefather. Mr. Shampoo for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It'll be difficult to be kinder than the past speaker in my questions. You could try, though. But all right. But we were discussing advertising earlier, and we had a laugh at the end of my question period, but I would like to insist on how important it is because people come to talk to us about advertising revenue so often. We have difficulty explaining why the federal government isn't spending its advertising money on small outlets. All right, so recovery since the pandemic. I think we can agree that we've returned to a situation where people can go back to venues without fear of getting COVID. There are still concerns, of course, and people in the cultural sector continue to ask us for help in recovery, small festivals, as I was saying earlier. So the federal government right now is doing its best to ensure that people be able to go back to in-person venues, sports, theater, culture, and so on. We can agree on that. Nevertheless, we see about $25 million less from the Canadian Fund for the Arts, 19 some for the Music Fund, 17 and some for Heritage, and less money for the cultural spaces, funds for Canada overall. So what's the problem? All right, but I have to refer you back to the COVID funding scheme. Yes, but in the report, we were told that the funding would be needed even after the end of COVID because the recovery of this sector was recognized as being more difficult and that it would depend on ongoing recovery funding, and it hasn't been maintained. This is what has been disappointing everyone in the sector. Look, the agreement, the assistance that we all agreed to was substantive, which kept a number of players alive. Luckily, small, medium, large music, stagecraft, so on. It was always clearly stated that that funding was pandemic related. There are other things we can do now. For example, renewing the funding for small festivals. We've just added $14 million over the next couple of years, $7 million a year. The tourism strategy for large festivals and large events. We've touched on that already. Music, it's something I care a great deal about. Something I'm looking into right now to see what more we can do in upcoming estimates. And I share your interest in helping these people. I have very little time. I think I'm nearly at the end of it. I just want to ensure that you remain available to these people. They'll be in touch with you. The small festival people will really have to give them some money this summer across the regions. Thank you. Thank you very much for your concern.
Minutes. Peter, you're on the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, we've seen today, as we've seen throughout all the discussions about C11 and C18. And what have we seen? We've seen disinformation. Disinformation that sometimes comes down from large tech companies, nothing to do with the actual legislation being discussed. In the months to come, as we organize around C18, it'll be really important to ensure that Canadians know what's actually in the legislation. What will you be doing, Minister, to fight back the disinformation which is often put forward by interested parties with a lot of resources behind them? It's a very relevant question, something that we can see with the high level of risk associated with increasing use of artificial intelligence, the disinformation risk. There's much to be debated here. I think there are a number of strategies. Why C18? We're strengthening free, neutral, autonomous news that people who like to do their research, who like to share facts, who like to be, fully accurate. There's programming on civic education, helping young people and groups recognize disinformation when they see it. But obviously, the government's not going to stand over all this and say, we know what the truth is, we know what disinformation is, but it's rather these institutions that we can support that can help people understand what disinformation is and help ensure that reliable free news provides correct news.
I wanted to shout out to the New West Anchor, the Burnaby Beacon, the Burnaby Now, the Royal City Record, all of whom will benefit from this. Is it in the plans of the government to have those voices, that local journalism that is being revived after years of having big tech suck all the advertising money out of communities? Is it your plan to ensure that Canadians are aware of how we are reviving the local journalistic sector and uniting people in their community?
Yeah, and I want to thank you personally, Mr. Julian, for all your work on C18 and the support that you gave us, the NDP, but you more at a more personal level. And because the work we did collectively is super important. And in too many regions, those papers, and Mr. Shield mentioned it, are struggling or disappearing. In some cases, an MP goes back home and there's no one to cover. And that's bad for democracy. People should know what's happening in their city hall, what's happening, what is their MLA doing, what is the MP doing. That's why we're going to be reinforcing those small papers through C18, and that's why collective bargaining is so important and why it's been included in that bill.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you again, Minister, for coming for the last 2 hours. Thank you to the staff of Canadian Heritage. I actually have one request, and it's from Regina, Saskatchewan, my province, where the RCMP Museum there is hoping to get national status. Can I flag it for you? The RCMP, 150 years this year, and we're hoping to join those in the precinct, also Winnipeg and Pier 21. So I just ask that you consider the RCMP Museum in Regina's national status.
Thank you for the message.
Yes.
And we're definitely working on that,
Good.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank
now
you.
to the rest. We have voting on main estimates. We have 16 votes here. How would you like to
We'll go together.
apply this? Ms. Gladue.
I would recommend that we pass them all on division, all at once.
Mr. Julian.
That is a brilliant suggestion.
All right. Seeing that, shall I report the main estimates to the House?
On division.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister and department officials. We're done.